AITA for asking my friend to split the bill evenly when they ordered significantly more than me. He also started charging us for inviting us to dinner and choosing the restaurant. A few nights ago, I went out to dinner with a group of friends. There were 6 of us in total, and we chose this pretty upscale place downtown that someone in the group had been wanting to try for a while. We're all in our late 20s, some of us a little older, and we've known each other since college. So we've built this tradition of monthly dinners where we catch up, vent about work, and just generally unwind. These dinners have always been something I've looked forward to, but this last one left me feeling pretty conflicted and, to be honest, still kind of bitter. For context, I've been trying to be more mindful of my spending lately. I'm in between freelance gigs at the moment, and while I've got enough in savings to get by, I've been budgeting pretty strictly just to avoid dipping too far into my reserves. So when the group chat blew up earlier in the week with the usual dinner this Friday message, I hesitated at first, but I figured, all right, I'll go. I'll just be careful with what I order. Before we went, we all agreed, as we always do, that we'd split the bill evenly. This has been our default system for years, and most of the time it works out fine. Sure, sometimes someone ends up paying a bit more or less than what they consumed, but generally it evens out across the months or so. I used to think. Anyway, we get to the restaurant, and it's one of those trendy, dimly lit places where everything looks designed for Instagram. The menu was on the pricier side, which I had expected, but still, when I sat down and started doing some mental math, I knew I had to stick to something modest. I ordered a simple pasta dish and a soda. That's it. No appetizers, no dessert, no drinks, just something that wouldn't wreck my budget. And I was totally fine with that. I wasn't there for the food, really. I was there to see my friends and keep the tradition going. But then there's this one friend, let's call him Chris. Now, Chris is the kind of guy who goes big at dinners like this. He's got a well-paying job in tech, no major financial obligations that I know of, and he's never been shy about splurging. Normally, I don't care what people order. It's their money, their choice. But it started getting under my skin when he ordered 2 appetizers right off the bat. A steak that was the most expensive entree on the menu, a fancy cocktail start, and then later followed it up with another drink and a shared dessert that he barely shared. I remember watching the waiter bring out plate after plate in front of him, and I kept thinking he's really going all out tonight. At one point, I noticed the rest of the group glancing over, probably thinking the same thing. But no one said anything. That's the thing with this group. We're close, but not always confrontational. Fast forward to the end of the meal. The waiter comes by with the check and places it in the middle of the table. Chris, of course, is the first one to reach for it and does that thing where he schemes it quickly and goes, all right, so we'll just split it evenly. Yeah. Now, in the past, I might have gone along with that without thinking. But this time, something in me hesitated. I kept track of what I ordered. My meal and drink came out to something like $28 before tax and tip. When I glanced at the bill and saw that the total was over $300, I felt my stomach drop. I did the math. An even split meant I'd be paying just over $50, nearly double what I had consumed. So I spoke up. I tried to keep my tone light, casually even, and I said something like, hey, do you guys mind if we each just pay for what we order tonight? I didn't get much, and things are a little tight this month. The moment I said that, I felt a shift in the air. Chris looked up from his drink with this raised eyebrow, almost like I had broken some unspoken rule. He leaned back and said, we always split evenly. Why make a fuss now? The way he said it, it wasn't loud, but it had this edge to it, like I was being petty or cheap for even suggesting it. The rest of the group didn't say much. A couple of them exchanged looks, but no one spoke up. It was like everyone was waiting to see which way the wind would blow. I hesitated for a second, and then that old familiar feeling of not wanting to be that guy kicked in. The guy who makes things awkward, who disrupts the vibe. So I backed down. I said, all right, yeah, it's fine, and reached for my card. We all paid the even amount, and that was that. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been pressured into paying more than my fair share again, because this isn't the first time this has happened. Chris has pulled this before, ordering way more than everyone else, and then acting like it's no big deal when the bill comes. And I get it. Maybe from his perspective, $50 isn't a lot. But for me right now, it is. What really gets to me is the expectation, the way he dismissed my suggestion like it was unreasonable, even though it made perfect sense, and the way the rest of the group just silently went along with it. No one backed me up, even though I'm pretty sure at least a couple of them were thinking the same thing. I left the restaurant that night feeling a mix of emotions, frustrated, a little embarrassed, and honestly kind of resentful. I know it's not just about the money. It's about feeling like my situation was ignored, like my attempt to set a boundary was brushed off as inconvenient. Now, I keep thinking, was I out of line for wanting to pay for only what I ordered? I didn't mean to cause drama, and I wasn't trying to call anyone out. I just didn't think it was fair to keep covering for someone else's extravagance, especially when I was making an effort to be responsible with my own spending. So yeah, I've been sitting with that for a few days now, and I can't help but wonder, was I the asshole for speaking up? Or was I just the only one willing to say what others were thinking but didn't want to say out loud? Update 1. I would love to say that after that awkward dinner, things settled back to normal, that maybe I had just hit a rough patch, voiced a frustration, and that my friends took in stride. That maybe they understood where I was coming from, and the vibe reset itself. But that didn't happen. To be honest, it only got worse. Over the next few weeks, we kept up with a monthly dinner tradition. On the surface, everything seemed fine. The group chat stayed active, people chimed in with suggestions, and plans got made without a hitch. But the energy was different, at least for me. I started noticing things I hadn't picked up on before, or maybe I had just been ignoring them. It was like a switch had flipped after that night, when I dared to question the sacred, even split agreement. My relationship with these dinners changed, not in an explosive, dramatic way, but in a slow, creeping erosion of comfort. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle, about feeling like my voice didn't carry the same weight in the group. What made it worse was Chris. Something shifted in his behavior after I spoke up that night. It was subtle at first, a few passive-aggressive jokes, a couple of digs about budget menus and soda-only diets that I try to laugh off, but that still stung. I told myself I was being too sensitive, but it wasn't just in my head. The guy had decided quietly, unofficially, that his role in the group was evolving. Somewhere along the way, Chris convinced himself that his contributions to these dinners warranted special treatment. It started when he began taking over the restaurant selection process entirely. Not that any of us had been fighting him for the job. He always enjoyed being the planner, the coordinator, the guy who knew all the new hotspots in town. But he started framing it as a burden. He would mention how much time he spent researching places, how hard it was to book tables for 6 people on a Friday night, and how lucky we were that he was willing to do all that for us. At first, I thought he was just venting, maybe fishing for a little appreciation. Then it escalated. One night, we met up at a new spot he had picked. It was this sleek modern fusion place with a minimalist menu and waitstaff that looked like they had been styled for a fashion shoot. The kind of place where the portions come out on black stone plates and look like art exhibits more than food. It turned out they only offered a prix tasting menu. None of us had realized that ahead of time. Chris had forgotten to mention it in the group chat. There was no a la carte option, no budget choices. It was a flat rate, and it was steep. We were already seated when we found out. At that point, we weren't about to walk out. I remember sitting there, doing the math in my head, trying to figure out how I was going to shift my budget for the rest of the week to accommodate this dinner. I wasn't the only one who looked a little uncomfortable. One of the guys glanced over at the menu and kind of winced, but no one said anything. We just went with it like we always did. And then halfway through the meal, Chris made this offhand comment about how much effort it took to organize the whole thing, how he'd spent an hour coordinating with the restaurant, negotiating the reservation, checking reviews, comparing tasting menus. Then he said something like, since he had gone through all that trouble, it made sense that he should get a little reward for it. He laughed when he said it, but it wasn't really a joke. It had this edge to it, like he'd already made up his mind. He didn't wait for approval. When the bill came, he just grabbed it, looked it over, and said that since he had organized everything, he was going to knock a bit off his share. Then he divided the rest of the check by 5 instead of 6. There was this moment of silence at the table. 2 of my friends looked clearly thrown off, like they weren't sure what to say. One of them actually reached for his phone to do the math, probably thinking he had misunderstood. But Chris just smiled smugly. Confident like this was completely reasonable. Like we should be thanking him for the privilege of attending a dinner he had so generously arranged. I remember sitting there, staring at the breakdown on my phone's calculator. It wasn't a huge difference, but it wasn't small either. It was enough to feel it, enough to notice, enough to remind me that I was once again paying for someone else's extravagance. And I wish I could say that I spoke up. I wish I could say that I called him out or challenged the fairness of it. But I didn't. No one did. The moment passed. The check got split, card got handed over, and the conversation moved on like nothing had happened. But it sat with me. It still sits with me. This new precedent Chris had decided on, this idea that his role as the planner somehow earned him a discount at our expense. It didn't just feel unfair. It felt exploitative, like he had figured out how to turn the group dynamic into a personal benefit, and the rest of us were just too passive, too polite, or too conflict-averse to push back. And again, I paid more than I should have. Update 2. I really wish I could say that the situation with Chris peaked at the tasting menu stunt and gradually faded into a mutual understanding that we all collectively realized things were getting out of hand and eased back into something more relaxed, more reasonable, more normal. But the truth is, things didn't just plateau. They escalated into outright absurdity. And the breaking point, the moment when everything just snapped into some bizarre reality where I actually had to reread the messages twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, came a few weeks later. That was the moment Chris seriously suggested we start tipping him $5 per person per dinner for convenience. I wish that were a joke. I wish that was hyperbole, but no, that was real. It started innocently enough, like it always did. One of us, Marcus, if I remember right, sent a casual message into the group chat. Just a simple, "Hey, are we still doing something this Friday?" The kind of thing we'd all exchanged 100 times before. A few others responded with some enthusiasm, tossing out general ideas and half suggestions. Someone mentioned a new ramen place. Someone else joked about just ordering pizza and hanging out at someone's place for once. It felt organic again, even fun for a second, like the way things used to be before the whole routine calcified into a one-man production. Then Chris chimed in, and it was like a chill settling over the thread. He didn't just reply. He wrote a block of text, an entire paragraph that felt like a mission statement. He said something about how he'd already scoped out a few places, how he'd narrowed it down to 3 restaurants that met his criteria for atmosphere and food quality, and how we'd all thank him later for sparing us the effort. The message had that familiar tone we'd all come to dread, half helpful, half condescending, written like a guy giving a TED Talk on how to be a good friend. But that wasn't the wild part. Toward the end of the message, he casually dropped the bomb. He wrote that this time to streamline the process and recognize the effort he consistently put in. He'd be sending out a Venmo link, just $5 each, nothing crazy. Just a small setup fee, as he called it, for convenience. Because, in his words, I'm saving you time, and that's worth something, right? It was so casual, so confidently inserted into the message, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Like it made perfect sense to charge your friends a finder's fee for looking up restaurants and sending a group text. There was a beat of silence in the chat. Not literal silence. This wasn't an in-person conversation, but that distinct pause you feel in digital conversations when everyone is reading the same thing, rereading it just to confirm it really said what they think it said. You could almost hear the collective mental double-take echoing across our phones. I just stare at my screen, not angry, not amused, just baffled. I had to scroll back and reread the message again because it didn't seem possible that someone I'd known for years, someone I'd considered a friend, had seriously typed those words and hit send. It was one thing to let him finesse his way into smaller dinner bills under the guise of organizing or to stomach his passive boasts about holding the group together. But this was something else entirely. This was like watching someone declare themselves the captain of a ship that no one had agreed to board in the first place. He wasn't offering a service. He wasn't fronting money or reserving a private space. He was sending texts and picking expensive restaurants without input and now wanted to be tipped for it. Tipped as if our group of friends had become his client base, and he was doing us a favor by granting us access to his planning prowess. And the scariest part? He meant it. This wasn't a joke or some half-sarcastic test of the waters. He genuinely believed his role in the group had become so indispensable that it now deserved financial compensation. $5 a person every dinner just to acknowledge the privilege of him picking the spot and relaying information we hadn't asked him to relay in the first place. Then came the reply that cracked the illusion. Jenna spoke up. Of all people, Jenna, who never says anything confrontational, who always plays the mediator, the peacemaker, the one who tries to spin awkwardness into something gentle and digestible. She responded not with anger, not with sarcasm, but with a simple, direct message. She said something along the lines of, "Chris, this is all starting to seem a little weird. It's not work. We're just friends." It hit like a tuning fork struck in a silent room. The kind of truth that didn't need volume to land hard. Chris didn't take it well. Immediately, he went on the defensive. The kind of reaction that had become second nature to him whenever he sensed even the faintest pushback. He launched into a multi-message rant about how none of us appreciated the time and energy he put in, how we all just took the group for granted, and how if he didn't step up, these dinners would fall apart completely. He said that we never wanted to take responsibility, that no one else ever volunteered to organize anything, that he was the glue holding us together, and we didn't even have the decency to acknowledge that. Reading his messages felt like being smothered by ego. Each sentence got heavier, more performative, more drenched in self-importance. It wasn't just about dinners anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was about control, about recognition, about him needing the group to orbit around him and being unable to process what it meant when that orbit was no longer guaranteed. He framed his role like a job, like a manager overseeing a project, rather than a friend spending time with friends. He talked about stress, about thanklessness, about being burdened with the weight of our indecisiveness. He painted himself as the martyr, the one who kept showing up when the rest of us were too lazy or ungrateful to take initiative. I sat there watching it unfold, not even angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the mental gymnastics. Tired of pretending this dynamic hadn't gotten toxic. Tired of watching someone turn simple social plans into a power trip. This wasn't leadership. It was manipulation disguised as responsibility. Chris didn't want help or collaboration. He wanted difference. And now, he wanted to be paid for it too. None of us responded. Not immediately, not because we agreed, but because we were drained. That kind of emotional fatigue where you know that anything you say will only spiral into another round of justifications. Another round of being made to feel guilty for wanting something fair and simple. But the damage had already been done. Chris had pushed the dynamic past its breaking point. He had turned what was once a shared ritual built on friendship and mutual joy into a transaction, into a stage where he played the lead and expected the rest of us to clap and pay cover at the door. What used to be spontaneous and easy now came with an invisible invoice attached. After that, the atmosphere in the group became even more tense. Update 3. The breaking point finally came on a humid Friday night in early summer. We were seated around a long wooden table at an Asian fusion spot Chris had chosen yet again, without much input from the rest of us. The place had a sleek, curated vibe. Low-hanging lanterns, minimalist bamboo decor, and menu items with names that barely hinted at what they actually were. Cocktails were $22 a glass, and the cheapest entree still hovered around $30. It wasn't the kind of place you stumble into on a whim. It was a spot you researched for a special occasion. But for Chris, it was just another Friday, another chance to put on the show he'd made our dinners into. We all showed up, quietly accepting the location, already used to the rhythm. By now, the rest of us had adopted this unspoken ritual of mentally bracing ourselves whenever Chris sent a message saying, "I made a reservation." We knew what that meant. We'd be paying more than we wanted, sitting through the performance of him acting like a social architect, and being expected to play the grateful audience. That night, as usual, Chris assumed his role without hesitation. He greeted us like a host welcoming guests into his home, talking about the chef's credentials and how he had discovered the place through some obscure food blog. When the menus arrived, there was that familiar, uncomfortable pause as everyone skimmed the prices and tried to pretend they weren't calculating how far over budget they were about to go. Drinks were ordered with hesitant nods, meals chosen more for price than desire. Some of us skipped appetizers. I stuck with water, but Chris, of course, went for 2 starters and a top-shelf cocktail without blinking. The meal was good. Really good, if I'm honest. But the tension sat like a second course, quiet but ever-present. Conversation stumbled around the tight trope of avoiding any mention of money. Everyone was just waiting for the inevitable, what we knew would happen the moment the bill came. And it did. The check was placed gently in the middle of the table, and Chris reached for it with the same automatic entitlement we'd seen too many times before. He scanned it quickly, smiled, and with a light chuckle said that his share was going to be a little less again since, as he reminded us, he had organized everything. That was when Brian, who had been quiet most of the evening, calmly put his phone down and said loud enough for everyone to hear, but without a trace of aggression, that he didn't want to pay for Chris's decisions anymore. He said that we could either choose the restaurants together, or we could each just pay for ourselves going forward. And if not, if Chris insisted on continuing this pattern, he didn't see the point of these dinners anymore. For a moment, everything froze. You could feel the air shift. It was like someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for months. No one moved. No one laughed it off. No one changed the subject. We all just sat there, finally letting the truth land. Then, almost in unison, the rest of us began to speak. I backed Brian up without hesitation. I told the group that I'd felt the same way for a long time, that the dinners had stopped feeling like a shared experience and started feeling more like a subscription fee to Chris's ego. 2 other friends nodded and added their own frustrations. Times they had kept quiet, times they had felt guilt into staying silent, times they had nearly dropped out altogether. Chris looked stunned. Not angry at first, just stunned, like he had genuinely not seen this coming. He mumbled something about how we were being ungrateful, how no one ever appreciated what he did, how he had always tried to keep the group together and make things interesting. But this time no one bit. No one smoothed it over. No one came to his defense. He paid his share, an honest, proportional one for once, and left early. No hugs, no handshakes, no see you next times. That dinner marked the end of the era. Afterward, we talked for a while. For the first time in a long time, the conversation was relaxed. We weren't holding our breaths, weren't measuring our words, weren't doing quiet math in our heads. We agreed that from now on, we'd rotate who chose the restaurant. Nothing fancy unless everyone was genuinely up for it. If someone was tight on cash, we'd find a spot that worked for everyone. No pressure, no performance, just a group of friends eating together equally. Honestly, Chris didn't come to another dinner after that night. A few days later, he left the group chat altogether. Before he did, he dropped a parting message that was more passive-aggressive than hurt. Something about how it was clear he wasn't appreciated, and maybe now we'd realize how much he actually did. But no one responded. No one tried to talk him down. No one asked him to stay. It was sad in a way. We had known each other for years. Shared birthdays, graduations, job changes, breakups. Chris had been a part of it all. But the truth is, what had started as a friendship had turned into a power imbalance we hadn't noticed until it got too heavy to ignore. And once that weight was gone, everything got lighter. The next few dinners were better. Not because the food was cheaper or the atmosphere less curated, but because they felt genuine again. There was no tension, no hierarchy, No sense that one of us was keeping score. We were just friends again, choosing where to go together, paying for our own meals, and finally feeling like equals at the table. So no, I wasn't the one who ruined the atmosphere. I was just the first to voice something that everyone had long disliked. And as it turned out, it was necessary to save the rest of the friendship. Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.